Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be doing a fairly quick video about the top 10 historical inaccuracies I hate in historical fiction. This is based off of a blog post which I just published on the 25th of September, and because my lucky number is 11, I'm going to be doing 11 on this list. I almost always do 11 when I say it's a top 10 list. It's just, the metadata, and people are more likely to click on a blog post or video when they see top 10 instead of top 11. And I recently, the purple scarves that cover up this ugly white curtain were washed, and I haven't yet pulled the ottoman into the room to hang them up, but hopefully my usual filming setup will be back in the next video. And so anyway, I am so tired of the gossip girl in period clothes trend. I've ranted about that in a number of prior videos and many blog posts, where real history is used as shallow, minor, meaningless window dressing for a story that feels, for all intents and purposes, like a contemporary. Surprise, surprise, if you can't bring yourself to accurately depict the past, bad things as well as good, you can't be arsed to do more than surface research, you're not the right person to be writing historical fiction. Or maybe you will be the right person at some point in future, but it's just not time yet. For example, I've written in a number of blog posts. It took me years before I felt comfortable using the word Negro in the actual narrative text, not just the dialogue in historical fiction. And then it finally, kind of dawned on me pretty much almost overnight when someone made, a respectful, well-meaning comment. And I believe it was from Sweet Saturday Samples, or maybe Six and Sunday, but I think it was probably Six Sweet Saturday Samples. But anyway, she was saying people wouldn't have been using the word African American in the 1960s, even though this was in the narrative text, not the actual dialogue. And that really woke me up. Oh, wow. I mean, yeah, the word black was starting to become more and more mainstream and common by the mid 60s, but who would have been using the word African American in the 60s or even before? No one would have used that word. So yeah, it made me realize, this, of course, word sounds pretty much dated for most people now, and it's not a word I would ever use because it's just a dated word. But in historical fiction, you're supposed to be accurate. So if you cannot accurately depict language and attitudes of historical fiction, just don't write it, or maybe wait until you get, and don't want to say get over, because sometimes these attitudes are morally repugnant, and you can't just say, oh, that's just how things were then. But at least until you can be, I guess, more comfortable, not so oh, this is horrible, I'm so triggered or whatever about depicting accurate attitudes that might offend you, just don't write it yet. I just can't say enough about I hate this whole trend, and I've ranted so many times in other blog posts. I might turn into future videos about so-called historical TV miniseries Sorry Not Sorry, World on Fire, that garbage. I hated that Netflix series, and with an E. It's trying to do the 21st century and the late 19th century. They made no attempt at historical accuracy. But anyway, and so as I said, since 11 is my lucky number, this list actually has 11 items, starting with number 1, ignoring the strict stratification between socioeconomic classes. Ugh, I've seen so much of this, and I'm always WTF. The example I rant about the most, I know this isn't a book, but it's still historical fiction and film, is the ridiculous MTV era love story in the 1997 version of Titanic. Sorry Not Sorry. But I've seen it many other places as well. People did not freely mix and mingle outside of their class. How do you not know this? They just don't teach history anymore. There were even lines between new and old money. Many people from new money, they were yo, you don't mix with us. And many of these new money families, they had to send their daughters abroad to England or sometimes other European places to find husbands, because, oh, we're not marrying our precious, precious, precious old money boys into, oh no, you're morally suspect. New money, you haven't been rich for not nearly long enough. You only less than one generation. We can't trust you. You can't come into our precious, precious family if you haven't been rich long enough. And so they had to send them abroad. I mean, this was a very, very real, and people took it seriously. I know everyone today likes to pretend, oh, we're all middle class, and pretending no one else is in any other socioeconomic class. But and much of the rest of the world outside of the US, and also historically in the US, this was something people took seriously. And people writing historical like fiction novels and TV series and movies and stuff these days, they just don't like realize or understand this. And even the bourgeoisie were classified in distinct subgroups depending upon how long their families had had that particular social status and level of income. No wealthy woman would consider a steerage passenger or stable boy prime material for a love affair, and the latter, I've heard, happens in the Lux series by Anna Godbersen. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. It starts in 1899 in New York, and it's a total gossip girl in period clothes. I tried reading her book, Bright Young Things. That's the name of the series. It's set in the 1920s, starting in 1929. It was the same, like over describing every frickin' thing instead of, God forbid, giving us an actual, plot or character development. I don't care about your little MFA showing off. Well, it sounded like she had an MFA, even if she didn't, with all the obnoxious over description at the expense of actual, plot development. Number 2, a matter of fact attitude towards premarital sex. Again, don't you know this? Yes, premarital sex has always existed, contrary to what modern-day neo-Puritans believe. Oh, girls saved themselves for marriage until that evil Roe v. Wade and the pill. Oh, and now everyone does it all the time. I think the pendulum has swung way too far, but, that does it. Oh, I just hate these people nowadays who think everything was like a Norman Rockwell painting or Andy Hardy movie until like the 60s or the 70s. Yeah, people were always having premarital sex, although they weren't as, public about it for obvious reasons. Our ancestors were much more discreet about it, particularly considering the terrible consequences if people found out. So particularly for the woman or the girl involved. So many of the teen girls and women engaging in premarital sex in supposed historicals exhibit no concern at all for what might happen if they get knocked up. It's just like my jaw hangs open when I see this, like WTF. Number 3, and speaking of, treating out of wedlock pregnancy like no big deal. Just read, for example, the one that comes to my mind, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. They treat like unwed mothers absolutely horrible. There's one particularly heartbreaking, memorable, the whole book is memorable, one particularly of the many memorable scenes, this young unmarried woman like takes her baby out in public, buys her a fancy pram, and people are throwing rocks at her, and like they actually like hit her and draw blood. Oh, how dare you slutted around, and you dare to keep your baby. How dare you show your baby love and publicly walk around and go out in public and buy her nice things. You should have given her away to a nice married couple, or just like hidden away in shame like the whore bag you are. It's just like horrible. And then there's the line even other women give to men who get their girlfriends in trouble. If she let you, she let others. And this one mother and her daughters give this line to a great guy who was prepared to marry his girlfriend. Oh, she must have slutted around. You can't really be the dad. Who knows how many guys she was letting into her boudoir, and he dumps her. This horrible double standard. Don't these people writing so-called historical fiction understand like this horrible, like heartbreaking, prevailing social like attitude in the past? This was by far the most glaring historical accuracy. I wrote a whole blog post about that. In the PBS miniseries World on Fire, thank God that was canceled and is not coming back for a 3rd season. I'm shocked it even came back for a 2nd season after the whole WTF, like one historical accuracy after another in the 1st season. Lois casually goes around pregnant outside of wedlock, making no attempt to pretend she has a husband, wearing clingy wiggle dresses. I'm totally lost for words. This is 1940 she's doing this. Casually saying she's not married when someone asks about her husband. Performing on stage at a nightclub until she goes into labor. This was still obviously there were like, Magdalen laundries and stuff in the UK and Ireland, and in the US they had Florence Crittenden homes, but for the most part, this was not yet the baby snatch era, so the focus was on keeping mother and baby together and helping the mother to so-called reform herself after she committed the sin of premarital sex and not marrying the father, so they wanted the mother to have a good job, get some education, and be able to support the baby, and hopefully at some point in future find a man who is, understanding enough to want to marry her, not care he wasn't getting, factory sealed merchandise, like he cared less about her so-called virginity, and he didn't mind inheriting a stepchild from another man. But this was like the most glaring historical inaccuracy of an already like garbage series filled with them, and pretty much the only historically accurate character in that whole series, Robina, she was depicted as a horrible person because she's not kumbaya, let's all sing and hold hands and mix and mingle with people who are not from our exact socio-economic class and do all sorts of stuff that's just flouting the social order. I hated that series so much. Number 4, this is another one I hate. Lazily establishing a woman as strong, independent, and proto-feminist by having her bash corsets. Seriously? Can we please quit perpetuating the persistent myths about corsets being dangerous death traps? Unfortunately, I believed this until maybe like 5 or so years ago. So the propaganda is very strong. Many people they don't even like ask for evidence or proof. So many people have said this for 100+ years. It must be true for some reason. A well-made corset, not the like Fredericks of Hollywood or Victoria's Secret stuff meant like primarily for sexy bedroom fun, but actual like functionally wearing it for, support, particularly when you have a larger figure. So yeah, that totally no comparison between, like sex corsets and like the ones you're supposed to wear all day. So well-made corsets, they're supportive undergarments, much better than modern bras. In fact, I would actually love to get some functional modern corsets myself because they provide like way better support for like the neck and the back and the shoulders instead of those like stupid little flimsy little straps. Only a tiny minority of women tight-laced slept in corsets and started wearing them as children. Our foremothers wouldn't have worn them in one form or another for centuries if they truly displaced organs, crushed ribs, and caused constant fainting, and they were absolutely nothing like the truly barbaric practice of Chinese foot binding. And I will put a link down below if you guys haven't already seen it. A video called How Victorian Men Taught Us to Hate Corsets by Karolina Żebrowska. She's a Polish vintage fashion vlogger. She has really, really awesome videos about historical fashion and stuff. So go check her out if you guys aren't already following her or haven't watched any of her videos yet. Number 5, this is yet another one that just drives me up the wall. Depicting terrible hygiene and sanitation as the norm. What? Believe it or not, our medieval ancestors really did bathe and clean their teeth. And there were many ways to minimize or eliminate BO pre-deodorant. And I have a whole series, I believe it was like, 21 blog posts about how to write and research medieval historical fiction, and hygiene and like health was one of those. I may possibly like to turn that into a video series as well. People also didn't routinely dump chamber pots into streets. In some places you could, get arrested or something, or people would be very angry. People weren't just going around dumping feces like right into the open street or like doing their business right out in the open. People just don't understand. The Middle Ages was not the so-called Dark Ages like Petrarch, shunned or like slandered it as, and so many people just obediently, like unquestioningly believed for centuries because, people have been saying that for so long, it must be true. Number 6, depicting huge age gap marriages as the norm. And I also have a blog post on the average marriage age in historical fiction. Maybe I'll turn that into a video as well. Historically, most couples were about 1 to 6 years apart, not 10+. And if they were like up to 10 years, it generally wasn't more than 10 years, and that still wasn't very common. Larger age gaps were somewhat more common among royalty, nobility, and the wealthy, but those marriages were usually strategic, diplomatic unions, not love matches. And there were certain, eras and places of the world where unfortunately large marriage age gaps were common, and sadly most of the girls getting married were like literal girls, not actual women, only like 13, 14, 15 years old. But again, that was not common. And even in places where they were marrying little girls to grown-ass men for like dynastic reasons and like, power like strategies and like alliances and stuff like that, they they were still an age of consent, so the marriage wasn't supposed to be consummated until the girl was, at least 12 or 13. Obviously, that's still way, way too young and totally creepy, but at least they had standards. And some of these people, they just try to rewrite history because, like, sorry, not sorry, their favorite, cult founder was marrying teenage girls, or even like little girls who weren't even teenagers yet. But obviously, that's a whole thing for a whole other topic. And leading right up to it, number 7, having girls getting married under 18. Outside of a few specific places and eras, this was not the norm. Most women were about 18 through 26, not all of 13 or 14. So, yeah, believe it or not, despite what a certain cult insists, it was really totally not common for 14-year-old girls to be marrying 36-year-old men in 19th century America. People thought that was weird and creepy and gross and scandalous. And most men in their 50s were not marrying 6-year-old girls and consummating the marriage. We know what that means when the girl was 9 years old in, the 9th or 7th century Arabia. Sorry, not sorry. That did not happen. That was not common at all, no matter what your pet cult leader did. Number 8, gay and lesbian characters matter-of-factly outing themselves or being discovered through a total lack of secrecy and discretion with nonchalant acceptance by their friends. I'm totally WTF when I see this in so-called historical fiction or series like Anne with an E or films. What were these writers born in 1990 or something? Do they not know history at all? Do they want their characters to turn out like Matthew Shepard? What's going on? I shouldn't even have to explain how beyond anachronistic this is. Even in the earlier 20th century, that got people killed, sent to loony bins or jail, given lobotomies, fired, disowned. The list goes on. And if they were in a cover marriage to try to so-called cure themselves or pass as straight because society was basically real super duper heteronormative, they could lose any children they had through that fake cover lavender marriage. And I have a video I did last June about how to write gay and lesbian characters in historical fiction. You guys can check that out if you are interested. Number 9, intermarriage and interdating shown as normal and accepted. This is both interracial and interreligious marriage. What year were these writers born? Do they not know history, basic history? This wasn't an era of kumbaya rainbow tribes. People stayed with their own kind, and there were serious social and personal consequences for stepping outside. Even Catholics and Protestants didn't mix by choice, and even white Europeans or people of white European descent, until the post-war U.S. explosion of suburbia, they tended to stay in their own little ethnic enclaves in the cities. For example, the Scandinavian Americans, the Irish, the Italians, Germans, Belgians, Dutch, the Eastern Europeans, and even within those groups, there were, lines sometimes. For example, Poles were almost all Catholics, and most other Slavs are, Orthodox Christians, and sometimes there are even Protestants thrown in the mix. For example, Czechs, people who are from, what we now call the Czech Republic, Czechs, and some Slovaks are Protestants, or just people just didn't mix. They stayed in their own ethnic and religious group. It's not, oh, that's cool, I'm just going to marry and fall in love with someone outside of my group. It's not like I'm going to be kicked out of my family, or we have to, make a choice. We can't just do, twice the presents at, Christmas and Hanukkah or whatever other holidays are involved. This was not at all intermarriage in the current era, and forget about interracial dating or intermarriage. That unfortunately got many people killed or sent to jail. It's just so damn much ignorance. Number 10, I hate this one. This is probably the one most people think of immediately about historical inaccuracies. Giving people current year values to try to make them more relatable and sympathetic. Newsflash, someone doesn't have to think, act, and talk exactly like you to be a good person. But I know, shocking in this day and age to believe that. And even the most radical, against-the-grain people in the past still operated within certain parameters. For example, a woman in 1480 might be highly educated by private tutors and marry for love, and even postpone marriage a little bit. Maybe she waits until she's 25 instead of 21 or so. but she's content to be a full-time wife and mother and help out with the family business in her spare time, which many women in the past did until the 1950s. They were really not an abomination. An abomination is like a good Freudian slip, an aberration in history, because prior until then, like most women, they were working. They weren't, like full-time stay-at-home moms. Like there were just so many factors that came together in a particular way after World War II and led to this like aberration in history known as the 50s. That was not the last gasp of how things had always been. That was just like a weird WTF decade in history. And so anyway, this a woman like might have like done all those things in the past to show she was like independent and ahead of her time and intelligent and had her own mind, but she would not have like, for example, petitioned for permission to attend university and gone on to have a like doing a whole career instead of having a family, or I'm going to wait until I'm 35 to have children, and I'm going to go sleeping around with all of Italy or Germany or wherever she lives. Like just like be sensible and do it within certain parameters. And also like for example, people who were even in the 20th century, where you do like to a fair extent have a bit more leeway in depicting like more like progressive against the grain people than like maybe like like 17th century, let's say, or like the Middle Ages or whatever. But there were still lines you didn't cross. For example, eugenics was considered a very like progressive social cause until the World War II and the Shoah made people realize this is terrible. We shouldn't sterilize so-called like defective people, or certain people we believe shouldn't be reproducing. And like twilight sleep birth, which was like totally barbaric, that was considered like an important step in women's rights. They didn't realize that wiped out their memories of giving birth, and it made them go crazy from the pain, and they were just like rubbed off like skin around their wrists because they had to be tethered to the birth cribs because they went crazy under the effects of the drugs. Obviously there were unfortunately not really many options at all for birth pain relief at the time, but just twilight sleep was just like a horrific thing that happened. But again, like people you would have otherwise thought of as progressive for their era, they still advocated and totally believed in things we now know are like, wow, what were people thinking? That's a absolutely horrible idea. And my lucky number 11, new technology or inventions suddenly becoming all the rage and widely used the moment they appear. I was big time guilty of this in the earliest drafts of my Atlantic City books. Most people had never even heard of things like answering machines and computers until well after their great-granddaddies had come and gone. On the flip side, I also had my characters anachronistically using things that just plain didn't exist, even in primitive proto-forms like portable tape players, pregnancy tests, and birth control pills. And another one I thought of, I've ranted about this many times on Twitter and on my blog over the years. It's like I want to bang my head against the wall every time I'm reading a so-called historical fiction or story, or even like on a web page, not like fiction, it's just a historical essay or a non-fiction book. They are referring to the northern section of the Lower East Side, which became more gentrified as the years went on as the so-called East Village. That part of the neighborhood did not like get uppity ideas and decide to break away with like a whole new name for themselves until about 1966, and even then the name didn't really start widespread catching on. And even today, many older residents of the Lower East Side do not recognize the so-called East Village because like historically it's all the same. They just have pretentious ideas because they're a little bit more like gentrified and hoity-toity and bohemian in the northern part of the neighborhood. So just can you not do basic historical research? And another one that just came to my mind, lucky number 13, referring to like prostitutes as so-called sex workers. Like name me one prostitute historically who used that stupid ass like modern term that basically erases the reality of being exploited and like used and trafficked into prostitution. Most prostitutes are not like fun sex workers who are voluntarily working in a high class brothel or doing like cam work or an upscale strip club. They're like there because they're poor and tricked and exploited and trafficked. I could rant all day about this, but anyway, thank you guys very much for listening. Let me know down in the comments, are there any inaccuracies that you guys really hate about historical fiction yourself? Like, have you committed any of these in the past? If you're a writer, what have you seen over the years on TV and films and in books that just really, really set you off, or mistakes you have learned from doing, and just maybe things you didn't realize were inaccuracies. So just let me know down in the comment. I love seeing comments from you guys, as long as they're respectful, and I will see you very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.